The gazebo lights hum. The cameras roll. And then it happens again. Before we go any further, that moment, that sound, that chaos on one of the most romantic sets in Hollywood history, we're going to get there. But first, you need to understand something. This film was never supposed to exist. Not the way it did. Not with those actors. Not with that director. Not with those children nearly dying in a lake in Austria. The version of The Sound of Music that the world fell in love with was built on secrets, accidents, near disasters, and decisions that studios prayed would never come to light. 20th Century Fox didn't just make a movie. They made a cover-up. And for decades, the people who were there, the cast, the crew, the studio insiders, stayed quiet because they were told to. But time has a way of loosening people's lips. And when Julie Andrews finally sat down on live television and started talking, everything unraveled. So let's go back. Not to the meadows. Not to the hills that are alive. Let's go back to the place where the magic broke down. Take after take after take. And nobody could stop laughing long enough to film a single usable second of what would become one of the most beloved romantic scenes in movie history. Because what happened in that gazebo was not romance. It was chaos. It was embarrassing. And the studio spent a small fortune trying to make sure you never found out. Here's the thing about the gazebo scene. You know it. You've seen it. The soft moonlight, the quiet tension between Maria and the captain, the slow, trembling moment before their first kiss. It's elegant. It's dreamlike. It feels like it was born fully formed. Like the camera just happened to catch two people falling in love in the most perfect light imaginable. None of that was real. What was real were the lights. Massive, industrial carbon arc lamps that the crew hauled in to simulate moonlight. These weren't gentle studio lights. These were machines, heavy, scorching hot, loud enough to rattle your teeth. And every single time Christopher Plummer leaned toward Julie Andrews, ready to deliver the most romantic line of the entire film, the lights made a sound. Not a click, not a hum. A long, wet, flat raspberry. A sound so absurdly, cartoonishly disgusting that the entire set erupted every single time. 20 takes. 20 versions of Maria, I Love You, obliterated by what sounded like the world's loudest, rudest bodily noise echoing across a moonlit gazebo in Austria. Julie Andrews later laughed remembering it. She said it was nearly impossible to be nose to nose with someone trying to be romantic while something beneath you sounds like that. The crew couldn't hold it together. The director couldn't hold it together. Nobody could. Hours passed. Nothing worked. Robert Wise, who had won Oscars, who had made West Side Story, who was not a man easily defeated, finally gave up. He scrapped the lighting. He scrapped the romantic close-ups. Instead, he placed Julie and Christopher in front of the glowing gazebo windows and shot them almost entirely in silhouette. Faces hidden. Expressions invisible. And here's the part that will stay with you. That haunting, glowing, dreamlike visual that audiences have been swooning over for 60 years? That wasn't artistry. That was damage control. That was a desperate director hiding two actors who couldn't stop laughing long enough to kiss. The studio immediately locked it down. Cast and crew were warned. Don't talk about the lights. Don't talk about the laughter. Don't mention the failed takes. Fox had too much riding on this film. Too much money. Too much desperation. Because what most people don't know is that when The Sound of Music was being made, 20th Century Fox was not a thriving Hollywood empire. They were dying. Cleopatra had nearly finished them. That one film, over budget, over schedule, drowning in scandal, had cost $15 million more than it was supposed to. Careers fell. Executives were fired. The studio was hemorrhaging money in ways that made their accountants physically ill. And then someone at Fox decided the answer was to spend over $1 million, $13 million in today's money, on the rights to a Broadway musical about a singing Austrian family running from Nazis. People thought they had lost their minds. But go back even further. Go back to before Fox, before Broadway, before any of this. Go back to a woman in the jungles of Papua New Guinea, tearing up letters she never bothered to read. Maria von Trapp had no agent, no entertainment lawyer, no one whispering in her ear about rights and royalties, and what her story might one day be worth. She was a missionary, traveling to remote villages, running clinics, teaching music to people who had nothing. when German filmmakers came knocking in the early 50s and offered her $9,000 for the rights to her life story, her entire life. She said yes without blinking. $9,000. She didn't know. She couldn't have known. Adjusted for today, that's around $100,000, which sounds almost reasonable, until you understand what that story eventually earned. Hundreds of millions of dollars. A Broadway phenomenon, one of the highest-grossing films ever made. And Maria von Trapp, the real woman, the actual human being whose life it all was, saw almost none of it. Meanwhile, letters kept arriving at every mission post she traveled to. Letters from some couple in America, a Broadway star and her husband, desperately trying to reach her about turning her story into a stage show. Maria didn't open them. She tore them up. Broadway was not on her list of concerns. But fate is patient. When Maria finally returned to the United States by ship, docking in San Francisco, Richard Halliday was standing on the pier. His wife was Mary Martin, the biggest name on Broadway at the time. He handed Maria 2 tickets to see her perform. Maria went, probably just to be polite, and something shifted. She watched Mary Martin on that stage and felt something she hadn't expected, genuine awe. But she still had to deliver the bad news. The film rights were already gone, sold to the Germans years ago. The door seemed closed. "You're welcome to give it your best shot," she told them. That casual, almost careless green light triggered one of the biggest cultural events of the 20th century. And it all came down to a woman on a pier being too polite to say no. The Broadway production that followed ran for nearly 4 years. Over 1,400 performances. Ticket sales that broke records before most people had even seen the show. And when Hollywood came calling to buy the film rights, 20th Century Fox paid a number that shocked the industry, over $1 million. For a studio already drowning, it was either a stroke of genius or a death wish. Nobody knew which yet. Now here's where it gets painful. And it gets personal. By the time the film was being cast, Julie Andrews had already conquered Broadway. She was Eliza Doolittle in My Fair Lady. She was the voice, the charm, the entire reason that show worked. But when Hollywood adapted it for the screen, they told her she wasn't camera ready. Not glamorous enough. Not a film star. They gave the role to Audrey Hepburn, who couldn't sing. Most of her songs had to be dubbed by someone else. Julie Andrews, the woman who made the role famous, watched from the outside. She was devastated. Quietly, completely devastated. But then Robert Wise got hold of an early, unfinished cut of Mary Poppins. He watched a few minutes, turned to the screenwriter, and said 4 words. "Let's sign her now." Before Disney even released the film, before the world knew what was coming, Julie was offered Maria von Trapp for $225,000. A flat fee. No royalties. No back-end deal. No share of the profits. Sign here, cash the check, and that's the end of it. She signed, and The Sound of Music went on to earn $286 million worldwide. It dethroned Gone with the Wind. It swept the Oscars. It became the kind of film that people watched 10 times in theaters, that families memorized line by line, that children in countries where English wasn't even spoken somehow knew every word of Do-Re-Mi. Julie Andrews never saw a single dollar beyond that original check. Not one. And now we need to talk about the man standing next to her. The man who hated every second of being there, and somehow gave one of the most iconic performances in the film's history while being, by his own admission, completely drunk. Christopher Plummer did not want this role. He had already turned it down multiple times. He thought the script was saccharine. The tone was unbearable, the whole project beneath him. He called it the sound of mucus, to anyone who would listen. He referred to it in interviews, with a barely concealed sneer, simply as S&M. Robert Wise flew to London personally to change his mind. And Plummer agreed, but only if they rewrote the captain. More depth, more darkness, better dialogue, and one specific demand, his own song, something that gave the character a real emotional moment. That demand is why Edelweiss exists. It is not an Austrian folk song. It is not a traditional melody passed down through generations. Rodgers and Hammerstein wrote it specifically for Christopher Plummer, a man who despised the film because he refused to do it without something that felt real to him. And then came the filming of that song. The festival scene. Captain Von Trapp singing Edelweiss with tears in his eyes, voice breaking, the children joining in, the entire audience holding their breath. Generations of viewers have pointed to that moment as proof the captain truly loved his family, as proof the story was real. Christopher Plummer was drunk when they filmed it. He admitted it himself, years later. He had been drinking heavily that day. He called himself young and arrogant, and said he had no genuine connection to the sentiment of the scene. And yet, the camera caught something. Something true, even if it was accidental. Something that reached through the screen and made strangers cry in movie theaters for 60 years. But there's one more thing about that scene you don't know. The voice singing Edelweiss, that's not entirely Plummer. The high notes, the sustained vocal moments, those were performed by Bill Lee, a professional singer who dubbed Disney films. Plummer's speaking voice carried the dialogue, but when the real singing began, someone else stepped in. Plummer was furious when he found out. He felt robbed, undermined, as if even the one thing he had negotiated, a song, a real emotional moment, had been taken from him and handed to someone else to finish. And yet most people never noticed. They still believe it's him. They still point to that scene. They still feel it. The irony would have made him sick if he hadn't eventually, decades later, grudgingly, admitted that the film had charmed him, that it took most of his life to see what it had meant to people, that maybe, beneath all the sentimentality he despised, there was something that mattered. He just couldn't see it from inside the misery of making it. And the misery wasn't only his. During the boat scene on the lake, the moment where the Von Trapp children tumble into the water, 5-year-old Kim Carruth, who played little Gretel, nearly drowned. The crew had told Julie Andrews, just before filming, that Kim couldn't swim. The plan was simple. When the boat tips, Andrews falls toward her, grabs her, keeps her safe. The boat tipped. Andrews fell backward. Kim went under. Then under again. Another actor had to dive in and pull her out. She swallowed lake water, vomited on the shore, and developed a fear of swimming that stayed with her for years. Julie Andrews was shaken in a way she rarely spoke about publicly. She said it was one of the scariest moments she experienced on that entire production. And the opening shot, the one you've seen 1,000 times. Julie Andrews, arms wide, spinning through an alpine meadow, the camera sweeping overhead in pure cinematic joy. That helicopter was 20 feet above her head. Every pass knocked her flat into the grass. 6 times. 7 times. Mud in her hair, wind screaming, hauling herself back up, and spreading her arms again like nothing happened. She later joked she was nearly launched into another country. The most joyful image in the film was filmed through pain, through mud, through a woman being slammed into the earth over and over while a machine the size of a small house roared above her. That's what they never put in the press releases. That's what Fox buried, smoothed over, and presented to the world wrapped in alpine flowers and a children's choir. Because the truth of The Sound of Music, the real truth, is that almost nothing went the way it was supposed to. The director they hired first walked away quietly, unable to pretend he cared about a musical he didn't believe in. The star they cast despised the project and drank his way through key scenes. The actress who carried the entire film walked away without a share of a single dollar of what became one of the most profitable movies ever made. A child nearly drowned. The most romantic scene in the film was filmed in silhouette because the lighting equipment wouldn't stop making fart noises. And somehow, out of all that wreckage, all that compromise, all those disasters quietly swept under the rug, came something the world has never stopped loving. Maybe that's the real secret. Not what went wrong, but the fact that it didn't matter. That the mess and the pain and the accidents and the cover-ups and the contracts and the resentment all dissolved the moment the music started playing. And 60 years later, people are still humming Edelweiss in languages they barely speak, in countries they've never left, to children who will pass it on to their own. Maria Von Trapp never got the money she deserved. Julie Andrews never got her cut. Christopher Plummer never fully made his peace with it while the cameras were rolling. But somehow, impossibly, they all left something behind that outlasted every grudge, every bad contract, every raspberry sound echoing across a moonlit gazebo. That's the thing about great art. It doesn't care how it got made.